Welcome to the channel, fellow lovers of inspiring and captivating stories just like us. Subscribe, it will bring us great joy. Don't forget to share the video, we'll be very happy about it. Here's another fantastic and captivating story for you. In the heart of an African city, where the sun cast golden hues over the bustling streets, stood Royal Crest Secondary School, a prestigious institution known for its academic excellence and cultural pride. Among its students was ALOMA, a young girl whose presence radiated brilliance and grace. ALOMA was the epitome of beauty and intellect. Her deep brown skin glowed under the African sun, her eyes shone with a spark of determination, and her demeanor exuded confidence. Unlike many of her peers, she carried herself with an air of quiet dignity, always respectful, intelligent, and deeply rooted in her faith. Her modest dressing mirrored her personality, simple yet elegant, a reflection of her inner purity and strength. She was a girl with a mission. Education was her passion, her escape, and her future. Every day after classes, while others laughed and loitered, ALOMA could be found in the library, flipping through the pages of thick textbooks, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. She was the pride of her teachers and the hope of her humble family, who had sacrificed much to see her excel. However, not everyone admired her diligence. A group of girls, always impeccably dressed yet notorious for their disruptive behavior, viewed ALOMA as an outsider. These girls, led by the flamboyant and defiant Sadia, spent more time flaunting their fashion, engaging in meaningless chatter and disrespecting teachers than focusing on academics. Their laughter echoed through the halls, their presence a spectacle in every class. To them, school was not about learning, it was a playground where rules were meant to be bent. ALOMA stood in stark contrast to them. She was often the subject of their whispers and mocking glances, but she did not waver. Her only concern was her studies, her future, and making her parents proud. She dreamt of becoming a great scholar, a beacon of hope for young African girls who aspired to rise beyond societal expectations. Yet, unbeknownst to her, her unwavering dedication was about to stir a storm that would test the very core of her strength and principles. Little did ALOMA know that her world was on the verge of an irreversible transformation. As days passed, the whispers turned into snide remarks, and the glances morphed into open hostility. The group of delinquent girls, led by Sadia, intensified their efforts to make ALOMA's life unbearable. What started as sarcastic comments about her modest dressing soon escalated to cruel pranks designed to humiliate her. They would hide her books, spill ink on her neatly written notes, and deliberately bump into her in the corridors, their laughter ringing in her ears as she struggled to maintain her composure. Despite their constant harassment, ALOMA refused to retaliate. She held on to her values, believing that her dedication to her studies would eventually shield her from their cruelty. But Sadia and her clique were relentless. Their jealousy was fueled by ALOMA's unwavering success, and they despised how she continued to shine despite their attempts to dim her light. One day, after receiving top marks in a particularly difficult mathematics exam, ALOMA found a crude drawing of herself scribbled on the classroom board, accompanied by mocking words, "Miss Perfect. Too good for us all." The class erupted in laughter, with the group of girls smirking from their seats. ALOMA clenched her fists but remained silent, her heart pounding as she erased the words. The teachers and headmaster, instead of intervening, turned a blind eye. Sadia and her friends were well-connected, daughters of wealthy and influential figures who made generous contributions to the school. Complaints against them seemed to vanish into thin air, and even when ALOMA found the courage to report their behavior, she was met with dismissive nods and vague reassurances. "It's just a phase," they said. "Girls will be girls." The harassment escalated further. One afternoon, as ALOMA walked home alone, she was cornered by Sadia and her friends in a secluded alleyway. They surrounded her, their expressions dark with malice. "You think you're better than us?" Sadia sneered, stepping closer. "Always acting so righteous. Let's see if your books can save you now." Before ALOMA could react, she felt a sharp push, sending her sprawling onto the dusty ground. Laughter erupted around her as her school bag was ripped from her grasp, its contents spilling onto the dirt. Pages of her precious notes were torn and scattered, trampled under designer shoes. ALOMA bit her lip to keep from crying, her vision blurring as she struggled to collect what remained of her hard work. That night, ALOMA lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her body aching from the attack. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the realization that she was utterly alone. The teachers whom she had once respected had failed her. The school, a place she had considered her second home, had become a battlefield. And the girls who tormented her weren't stopping. With each passing day, the burden became heavier. Her once perfect grades began to slip, her mind too clouded with fear and exhaustion to focus on her studies. She stopped staying late in the library, dreading the possibility of another encounter. The girl who had once stood with unwavering confidence now walked with her head lowered, her once bright spark fading into shadows. The silence of the faculty was deafening. The injustice of it all gnawed at her spirit. And as her world crumbled around her, a dangerous thought began to take root in her mind. What if she gave in? What if she stopped fighting? What if she became one of them? Little did she know, Sadia and her friends had already planned their next move, one that would change ALOMA's life forever. The days of suffering had drained ALOMA, both mentally and physically. Her grades, once flawless, had taken a sharp dive, and whispers of her potential expulsion loomed in the air. She was no longer the vibrant, confident student everyone admired. She was a shadow of her former self. It was in this moment of vulnerability that Sadia and her friends saw their opportunity. One afternoon, as ALOMA sat alone in the school courtyard, her head buried in her hands, Sadia and her clique approached her. But this time, there was no hostility in their expressions. Instead, they wore practiced smiles, their voices sickly sweet. "We see you're struggling," Sadia said, sitting beside her. "You don't have to keep fighting alone. We have a solution for you. A way to get back on top." ALOMA hesitated, wary of their sudden change in demeanor. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sadia leaned in closer. "We can help you. You just have to be part of us. Entertain the teachers a little, and in return you'll get the grades you need. No more stress. No more suffering." ALOMA shook her head, her heart pounding. "I can't do that. It's wrong." Sadia smirked. "Is it wrong to save yourself? To make things easier? Look around, no one cares about you. Not the teachers, not the headmaster, not even your books. But we can make it all better." The words hung in the air like a poisonous mist, and ALOMA felt a chill run down her spine. Could she resist them, or had she already lost the fight? The school bell rang, signaling the end of another day. But for ALOMA, time had lost its meaning. She was no longer the diligent student who rushed to the library after class. She no longer cared about textbooks, formulas, or historical dates. Her world had tilted on its axis, and she was spiraling into a new reality, a world where education was no longer about learning but about transactions. That evening, she stood before the office of Mr. Ken, her mathematics teacher. Her hands trembled as she knocked on the door. She had never imagined herself in this situation, but the suffocating pressure of failure, of losing everything she had worked for, left her with no escape. "Come in," a deep voice called from inside. She entered cautiously. Mr. Ken, a man in his late 40s, adjusted his glasses as he looked up from his desk. His expression softened upon seeing her. "Ah, ALOMA. What brings you here?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Words failed her. As if sensing her hesitation, he leaned back in his chair. "Let me guess. You need help with your grades?" She nodded slowly. A smirk played on his lips. "You're a bright girl, ALOMA. But even the brightest sometimes need guidance." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Come sit." Her heart pounded against her ribcage as she sat down. The walls of the office felt like they were closing in. She thought about her parents, about her past self, the girl who once prided herself on integrity. But that girl was fading, buried under the weight of betrayal, despair, and fear. The conversation was brief, but the implications were crystal clear. That night, as ALOMA left Mr. Ken's office, her body ached in places she had never known pain before. Her mind screamed in protest, yet her new friends assured her that things would get easier. And they did. She learned the ropes quickly. The first time had been the hardest, but soon she discovered the tricks, the methods, the power of persuasion. No longer did she need to burn the midnight oil over textbooks. Instead, she perfected the art of manipulation, mastering the unspoken agreements that secured her success. Her transformation was swift and undeniable. The girl who once dressed in modest, simple attire now adorned herself in bold, revealing outfits. The once reserved and soft-spoken ALOMA now walked the school corridors with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. She no longer needed respect, she commanded attention. Money was never a problem. Expensive handbags, designer shoes, extravagant outings, everything was within reach. The teachers who once praised her intellect now sought her presence for different reasons. Grades became irrelevant. She could get whatever she desired with a mere glance, a whispered promise, a well-timed rendezvous. Life was sweet, or so she thought. But beneath the surface, darkness loomed. She ignored the gnawing emptiness that crept into her soul. The voices of conscience that once guided her were now distant echoes, drowned in the deafening allure of material pleasure and fleeting validation. Yet, deep inside, ALOMA knew she had made a deal with the devil. And soon, the price of her choices would come knocking at her door. It started as a whisper, a small discomfort in her stomach, an occasional dizzy spell. ALOMA dismissed it at first, blaming fatigue and stress. But as the days passed, the symptoms worsened. The nausea became unbearable, her body weaker, and a fever burned within her. The girl who once walked the school corridors with pride and power now staggered, struggling to maintain the illusion of control. One morning, she barely made it to the bathroom before collapsing beside the sink, heaving violently. As she wiped her mouth, a terrifying realization gripped her. Something was seriously wrong. Fear clawed at her chest as she made her way to the hospital. Sitting in the cold waiting room, she fidgeted anxiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. When the nurse finally called her name, she walked into the doctor's office with trembling legs. Dr. Noe, a woman in her 40s with a calm but authoritative presence, studied ALOMA's chart before meeting her eyes. "Miss ALOMA, your test results are back." ALOMA clenched her fists, dreading the words that followed. "You are pregnant." The world around her blurred. She struggled to process the words, her mind racing in circles. Pregnant? Oh, which one of them? Panic twisted her insides as she tried to remember the many nights, the whispered agreements, the careless encounters. But the doctor wasn't finished. Her voice, though steady, carried an air of grave concern. "There's more," she said, flipping through the report. "We ran a full blood test. ALOMA, you are HIV positive." The words echoed in the silent room like a death sentence. ALOMA gasped, her breath caught in her throat. Her body went numb and the walls seemed to close in around her. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. "No. No, that's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head violently. Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the truth settled upon her. She stumbled out of the hospital, her mind fogged with disbelief. The streets blurred as she walked aimlessly, her vision clouded with tears. She needed answers. She needed to know who had done this to her. One by one, she confronted the men who had once called her special. Mr. Ken, Mr. Adebayo, the headmaster. They all fell silent, their faces pale with horror. None could deny it. They too had been infected, unwittingly caught in the same vicious cycle. But the worst discovery came when she met with Sadia and the other girls who had lured her into their world. They too were infected. Some had already disappeared, others barely spoke, consumed by guilt and despair. One had taken her own life, unable to bear the shame. The beautiful, glamorous world they had created was nothing more than an illusion, shattered by the cruel reality of their choices. The expensive clothes, the power, the influence, it all meant nothing now. Their bodies, once coveted, now carried the mark of death. ALOMA fell to her knees, sobbing into the dirt. She had traded her soul for fleeting pleasures, and now, the consequences were irreversible. There was no escape, no way to turn back time. She was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. As the truth spread, the school was thrown into chaos. Parents stormed the gates demanding justice. The headmaster and teachers were arrested, and the once prestigious institution crumbled under the weight of scandal. ALOMA, broken but still breathing, knew she had one choice left: to use her voice to turn her pain into a warning for others. But would the world listen? As the days passed, despair turned into determination. ALOMA, though broken, refused to let her story end in silence. She had lost her innocence, her future, and her health, but she still had a voice. She began visiting schools, standing before young girls who reminded her of her past self. With every word, she poured out her pain, her regrets, and her warnings. She spoke of the allure of easy success, the dangers hidden behind false promises, and the irreversible consequences of compromise. Many of her former friends succumbed to despair, unable to face the truth. Some took their own lives. Others disappeared into obscurity. The school was shut down and many teachers were arrested. But ALOMA carried on, fueled by a new purpose. Though her health deteriorated with each passing day, she refused to stop. Her story became a movement, a cautionary tale that spread beyond her city. Mothers wept as they listened, fathers held their daughters tighter, and young girls saw in her the stark reality of choices made in desperation. On a rainy morning, ALOMA took her last breath. But her legacy did not die with her. Her name became a symbol of resilience, her voice an echo in the corridors of schools where her warnings continued to save lives. ALOMA was gone, but her story lived on, a light guiding others away from the darkness she had once embraced. There you have it, we've reached the end of this incredible story. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and share it. We would also love to hear your thoughts on the phenomenon of sexually transmitted grades. Share your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.